Welcome to the Daily Report for June 17th, 2024. I'm John Dickerson. The Israeli war cabinet has broken apart, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu disagrees with his military's humanitarian pause. What's going on? We'll have a report from Israel and analysis on the situation. Summer officially starts Thursday, but nature's already cooking up the asphalt. Nearly 265 million Americans will experience temperatures above 90 degrees this week. Whether it's to escape the heat or not, Americans are setting travel records, even on days that aren't a holiday. Why? It's not just the heat, but the success of global agriculture that has turned fertile land into deserts. 30 years after a global effort started to protect the soil, we'll take a reading of the shrinking topsoil that helps feed us. The biggest competition in France this year was supposed to be the Olympics, but now it's the snap election to determine the fate of French President Emmanuel Macron. Plus, the Maryland governor pardons pot offenders. The Autocrats Club holds a meeting in Pyongyang, and the Surgeon General wants a warning on social media. And finally, a Stanford student collects her diploma at age 105. And celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay says a bike helmet kept him from missing all the rest of his birthdays after a brutal accident. The Daily Report starts in a moment. Hello, thank you for joining us. We begin our report in Israel, where a seemingly united front is now broken. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu announced Monday he has disbanded his war cabinet. The group, made up of political and military advisors, has helped influence Israel's response in its war with Hamas. It included Netanyahu's chief rival, Benny Gantz, who last week resigned from the cabinet and the government. Gantz has accused Netanyahu of putting his own, quote, political survival over Israel's security needs. He also disagreed with the prime minister over a post-war plan, something Netanyahu is expected to discuss when he addresses Congress next month. The disbanding of the war cabinet comes a day after the Israeli military announced a, quote, tactical pause in fighting in some parts of southern Gaza, including the city of Rafah. The pause is supposed to allow a backlog of humanitarian aid into Gaza as millions of Palestinians face famine. CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay reports from Tel Aviv.
Well, it was a coalition of rivals meant to sow unity in Israel after the Hamas attacks of October 7 and the conflict that followed. Last week, that changed when Benny Gantz, the leading moderate opponent of the prime minister, left the war cabinet over the absence of a day-after plan for Gaza. The war cabinet now dismantled. That leaves Netanyahu only with the hard right as the linchpin of his support. The shakeup comes after Israel announced a tactical pause in the fighting, limited to 7.5 miles of road in the Rafah area during daylight hours only to allow more aid. But the offensive continues in Rafah. Israeli forces say they now control 70% of this Hamas stronghold. The UN says 1.3 million people have fled the city since the fighting began. Meanwhile, protests in Israel continue as frustration with the government's conduct of the war grows. It's been more than 8 months since the war started, with 120 hostages still in Hamas custody. It's early days for Israel's tactical pause to usher in more aid, but so far UNICEF says they've seen no more than usual entering Gaza. And the humanitarian pier the U.S. built, it's down for repairs again due to rough seas. Officials hope it will be up and running later this week. John?
Chris Livesay in Tel Aviv, thank you. And later this hour, we'll have more analysis on Israel's decision to dissolve its war cabinet and the effect it could have at this point in the conflict with Hamas. The heat wave is forecast to bring dangerously hot temperatures to the Midwest and Northeast this week. At least 265 million people will experience temperatures above 90 degrees Fahrenheit across the country. That's nearly 80% of the U.S. population. More than 22 million will see temperatures over 100 degrees. According to the National Weather Service, a heat wave is a period of abnormally hot weather, generally lasting more than 2 days. The CDC says more than 1,200 people are killed due to extreme heat across the nation each year. Health officials are urging people to make plans now to stay safe. CBS News senior weather producer David Parkinson joins me now for more. All right, David, let's focus on the areas that are going to get hit by this week. What are they?
Yeah, so let's start. Here are your alert maps. So this is your excessive heat watches, warnings, and advisories. Basically, any place where you have the deeper reds or the purples, that's where you're going to be having feels like temperatures. So, in fact, it's in the Philadelphia area, in the Lehigh Valley, on up into the Pioneer Valley, and then the Merrimack Valley on up north of Boston. Those are places you could be having feels like temperatures above 105 degrees as the week goes on. Everywhere else, you've got feels like temperatures above the triple digits, and the actual air temperatures will likely be somewhere in the ballpark of 95 or so degrees. Big area high pressure setting up. That's the heat dome. The distinction between the heat dome and the heat wave, right, is heat wave depends where you are in the country, but for the Northeast, it's 3 consecutive days or more of 90 degrees. We'll have way more than 3 consecutive days in a lot of parts of the Northeast. Pittsburgh may have its longest stretch in 30 years. But writ large here, even where you don't necessarily have the 90-degree temperatures continuing for a week or more, you still have this dome in place, and it looks to be locked in there for a good long while. And
David, I'm just the kind of lavender area over the Baltimore, Washington. Is that going to be the hottest part of the heat dome?
So interestingly enough, this is actually not surface temperatures. This is temperatures up in the atmosphere.
Oh.
So this shows you, remember when we talked about heat domes, that's high pressure squishing down, so it's compressing all the air. That's what this is here. So it's actually warm all the way up. But when we talk about the hottest temperatures tomorrow, believe it or not, it is hotter in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Syracuse than in Philadelphia. But all of these are dangerous temperatures. Then as we advance this on to your Wednesday, take a look at that. 101 in Manchester. I don't know if you remember covering politics in New Hampshire, but 101 is not a temperature that New Hampshire is equipped for. And in fact, that comes within 2 degrees of their hottest day ever. And then this heat continues actually on into Thursday, where Manchester gets to 103, and Philly gets to the triple digits. So this is really some incredible heat. The one other thing that I just want to point out for you here, John, when you have a 100-degree temperature, your blacktop temperature is 160. So please do not let your pets go out on blacktop. It will cause burns. The other thing with this 100 degrees here, after 30 minutes, your car's internal temperature will be 134 degrees. That, again, is a reason why you need to make sure that nothing living stays bottled up in an environment for any time at all without air conditioning.
That's so useful, David. Finally, quickly, when is some relief going to hit these poor people in Manchester?
Yeah, so I don't have a lot of good news here, John. This is your 6 to 10 day outlook. So not only do we have an expanding heat dome continuing here, in fact, you may have close to 2 weeks in the nation's capital above 90 degrees, but then we've got another heat dome developing in the west. That one, particularly for the Great Basin states on into California, is a problem because not only do we have the heat, but we also have the fire conditions that we've been seeing over the last couple days in Southern California and the Central Valley. And unfortunately, this will be more dry air drying things out and really causing the fire risk to increase.
David Parkinson, thank you as always, David.
I'll be back to that mild dome at some point, but not anytime soon.
Exactly. We got better news from you at some point. Thanks again, David.
Thanks, John.
Meanwhile, Jordan's foreign ministry says 14 citizens died during the annual Hajj pilgrimage in Saudi Arabia due to severe heat conditions. Temperatures in Saudi Arabia soared past 114 degrees during the pilgrimage, which is being attended by more than 1.8 million Muslims. Many rituals are performed at the Hajj outside and on foot with long walks. Performing Hajj is one of Islam's 5 pillars and a religious requirements for all Muslims. A fast-moving wildfire northwest of Los Angeles has burned more than 15,000 acres of land and forced more than 1,200 people to evacuate from a state park. The blaze is believed to have started on Saturday afternoon in Gorman, which is in Los Angeles County. High winds are expected to complicate firefighting efforts. So far, the fire is the largest the state has seen all year. It's only 8% contained, according to CAL FIRE. The U.S. saw a wave of gun-related incidents over the weekend. According to the Gun Violence Archive, there were 14 mass shootings between Friday and Sunday. Those are defined as incidents where 4 or more people are shot. There have been 229 of those so far this year, putting the country on pace to top the 656 that were seen in 2023. In Detroit, police have identified the suspected gunman who wounded 9 at a suburban splash pad. In Texas, 2 people were killed and 14 were injured in an attack on a Juneteenth celebration. Injuries were also reported from weekend mass shootings in Illinois, Massachusetts, and Ohio. Maryland's Democratic governor has pardoned more than 175,000 marijuana convictions, making it the largest state pardon to date. Governor Wes Moore's actions will forgive low-level marijuana possession and paraphernalia charges for an estimated 100,000 people. His office noted that while only 10% of the state's population lives in Baltimore City, its residents represent roughly 25% of the pardons. Speaking before the signing, Moore highlighted the harmful effects of past policies on people of color.
Policies have been intentionally deployed to hold back entire communities. We're talking about tools that have led to the mass incarceration of Black men and boys. We're talking about tools that have led to restricted access to jobs and housing in minority communities.
Recreational marijuana was legalized in Maryland last year. The state has also decriminalized possession of personal use amounts. Acres of healthy, fertile land are turning to brittle, dry desert. Coming up, the Earth's soil is degrading at a rapid pace. We'll learn why and what can be done about it. Plus, last week, French President Emmanuel Macron took a major gamble that voters wouldn't want to see radical change in the country's politics. What happens if he loses that bet? You're streaming the Daily Report.
Coming up, our series. Wait a minute. Tom, is that you working the camera?
Keep leaning out of your close-up.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
I had progressively fallen deeper into the world of online sports betting.
The risk is the rush.
What do you think is driving the spike in popularity?
I think it's legality.
If it's legal, I'm going to use it. There are ways to bet when you are 18.
We've created an epidemic of child gambling.
You can't walk into a male dormitory in a college campus without sports betting happening.
It's America's most neglected problem.
I use sports betting as a way to escape, when in reality, I'm choosing self-destruction. Whatever I had left, it was gone.
The purpose of the industry is to get you to play to extinction. And that means until all your money is gone.
Go to the ends of the earth. Reach for the stars.
Yeah, I just took off. That kind of thing.
That's pretty good. Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
That desired farm, it's a wonderful place to raise children, and it still is.
Promises broken.
Black Americans have been the target of racism and discrimination pretty much from the time they acquired ownership in the land.
Costing black farmers hundreds of billions in generational wealth.
They did everything to make sure we were run off that land.
But communities are uniting to continue the fight.
Collective ownership is powerful.
To keep their land and their dreams alive.
To watch my children play on land that we own means everything.
So land is power.
Most definitely.
40 Acres and a Mule, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
People with developmental disabilities were once sequestered by the hundreds of thousands in institutions.
Many of our fellow citizens are suffering tremendously because lack of attention, lack of imagination, lack of adequate manpower.
Disability activists have since torn down barriers blocking them from living at home or in the community.
We conclude that Title II of the ADA requires states to provide community-based treatment for persons with mental disabilities.
But of the 16,000 people who remain in state-operated institutions, half are in 5 states, and Illinois is one of them.
I don't want to live in the institution. It makes me feel discriminated against.
Do you think there are people living in institutions in Illinois
that don't need to be living there.
Yeah, because they're proving it as soon as they get out.
We're less than 2 weeks away from the first presidential debate between President Biden and Donald Trump. Both candidates campaigned this weekend. President Biden raised money in Los Angeles at a star-studded fundraiser featuring a conversation with him and former President Barack Obama. Trump stomped in the battleground state of Michigan, speaking to black voters in Detroit. To help us check in on the state of the race, we're joined by Dan Balls. He is the chief correspondent at the Washington Post. It's great to be with you, Dan. You wrote today about a group of voters that will be particularly important to the 2024 outcome. Can you walk us through, give us a sense of who those voters are that you wrote about?
Yeah, John, and thanks for having me. We know that a relatively few number of people are going to decide this election in 6 battleground states. And we tried to set out to figure out who some of these voters are and what they think. And what we call the deciders are actually a sizable group. It's 6 in 10 voters in those 6 states who have either voted in only one of the last 2 presidential elections or are under 25 and therefore don't have any particular voting history or switched their votes between 2016 and 2020 or have not firmly made up their mind about who they're going to vote for. And what we found, John, was that this group is younger than the average registered voter or those voters who've made up their mind. They are more dissatisfied than the other pool of voters with the 2 major candidates. They are less enthusiastic about this election. They are not paying as close attention. They are less likely to say that this election matters to them a great deal. And more are less likely to think that their vote will really matter. So I think there are a couple of takeaways on this. One is that there are just a lot of people who are still in flux. They may be leaning in one direction or another, but they really haven't firmly made up their mind. And so there's a long way to go in this election at a time when the overall polls have been pretty static. The other is that for President Biden, there are some worrisome signs. One is that this group in general skews a little bit more toward his natural coalition, and that they're younger and they're more non-white than those voters who have made up their mind. And the second is that on a number of issues that they say are the most important to them, they actually think that they favor, or they think that former President Trump would do a better job on those than President Biden. So this is one early look at a group that's going to be very, very important.
And with that group in mind, Dan, I'd like to get your thoughts about the new $50 million that the Biden campaign is putting into a new ad. It's focused on Donald Trump's felony conviction, his other convictions in other cases. The ad itself is called Character, although I don't think that word is used in the ad. How do you see that as a part of the Biden strategy, and how do you think that lands with the audience that you just outlined, or maybe the electorate more broadly?
Well, I think it's aimed at both the electorate more broadly, but certainly at the voters that we're talking about here. And I say that for this reason. One of the frustrations of the Biden campaign throughout this year is that many voters have a more favorable impression of the Trump years than they did during the Trump years. And the Biden team has been looking for ways to try to get them to reassess. And this ad that they launched today and the amount of money that they're putting behind it is very much aimed at that. They clearly highlight the conviction, but I think the underlying message is that the Donald Trump you think you know is not the Donald Trump who's running in 24. That this is somebody who does not care about you. He cares only about himself. And everything that we have seen this year, they're suggesting in the ad, points to that reality. So they're trying to refocus voters on a different Donald Trump than voters seem to think at this point.
And very quickly, Dan, at the end, as you head into covering this debate, how should voters, how are you thinking, how should voters think about this debate coming up? This is such a different kind of campaign. How should we think about it?
Well, I think it's an extension of what we're just talking about, which is will this debate in some way or another redefine the choice that people see in November, and will it force them to reassess, particularly former President Trump? But there's a gamble for President Biden in this. he must do very well in this debate to overcome some of the doubts about him.
Washington Post Dan Balls. Thank you, Dan, as always.
Thank you, John.
Now to a digest of some foreign news. Some 2.5 years after Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, nearly 80 countries have signed a joint statement affirming their belief in the country's territorial integrity. It follows a weekend peace summit hosted by Switzerland. Vice President Kamala Harris was there on behalf of the United States. Russia was not invited. And the United States reportedly launched a secretive campaign in the Philippines to counter China's response to the COVID-19 pandemic. According to Reuters, it found the U.S. military used hundreds of fake social media accounts to discredit the effectiveness of masks and vaccines produced in China. The campaign reportedly began in the Trump administration and continued in the Biden era. Spokespeople for both administrations did not comment on the reporting. June 17th marks World Day to combat desertification and drought, a reminder that the fight for healthy soil is a race against time. Every second, about 4 football fields worth of healthy land becomes degraded and low quality, posing a risk to global food supply. About 52% of the Earth's agricultural land is already in this infertile state, according to the Save Soil movement, citing data from the Intergovernmental Panel on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services. If the current trend holds, 95% of the Earth could be degraded by 2050. Martin Frick joins me now. He's the director of the World Food Programme's global office in Berlin. Thank you for being with us. If 95% of the Earth's soil becomes degraded, what would that mean for the world's population who has to eat food from that soil?
It would basically mean, John, a total collapse of the global food production. What we are seeing today, as you said, is a loss of 4 football fields a second. That translates into a loss of the entire size of Egypt a year. Still, we are producing enough food, but if this continues unchecked, our food production will be severely impacted.
And why is this happening? What's causing this to happen?
Well, it's a mix of things. It's basically unadapted agriculture. It's cutting down on trees. It's large-scale industrial agriculture. And often it's conflict. And on top of everything else, there's climate change just making agriculture more difficult than it ever was before.
So does that mean there is a potential solution if the agriculture becomes more mindful that you can't just gobble it all up, that you have to think about agriculture as a sustainable process? Does that mean that the possibility this trend can be reversed is out there?
Totally. There's a giant opportunity here. And we are not only talking food production, we are talking bringing back biodiversity, which sometimes sounds like a luxury, but we are part of biodiversity. And with the rate of biodiversity dying, we are endangered as a species ourselves. But there's also climate change, which basically means there's just too much carbon in the atmosphere and way too little carbon in the soils. If we succeed bringing it back down, we have a quick and a working solution to the climate crisis at our hands.
Back on the biodiversity topic, can you define for people what biodiversity means so they can understand that? And then also what would be required to improve that condition for this crisis?
Well, let me make a simple example. More than 60% of our food somehow has to do with pollinators, with bees. If we are killing the bees on our planet using pesticides, we are actually firing in our own feet. We are reducing our own productivity. Now, I said we can reduce and we can even undo land degradation. And what's needed is simply hard work. And where we work in many places of the Sahel, for Sahelian countries, for example, we have mostly women working their own land, digging micro dams, half moons, as we call them, collecting rainwater and pushing back the desert by bringing back trees, by bringing back vegetation and building up topsoils, doing composting and other measures in order to turn that desert back into arable land.
And in that kind of a project, help me understand what's required. Is it the individual actions of just citizens, or is there also a governmental piece that is the gateway that needs to open for those kinds of programs to work, to rebuild the soil?
It's a combination of both. In many of the sub-Saharan African countries, you still have areas where women are not allowed to hold land. However, where we work, the majority of people who live there are actually women and children. Because of migration, many times the men have already migrated in major cities. So we need a legislative framework. We need women to be empowered to own their land and to inherit the land to their daughters. And then what's needed on the other side is very simple manual work. You're basically building these little dams. They look like little half moons, holding back the rainwater, making sure that it stays longer on the land, that they can infiltrate the soil. In these half moons, the women cut little holes in it and they fill it with straw and dung. It's as low-tech as you can imagine. But if you put a tree in that tree will survive, even in an extended period of drought. And that starts a positive circle. That's creating shade. That's reducing the ground temperature by 4 to 6 degrees. That's bringing back humidity. And in the shadow of those trees, you can start gardening. And we have examples where within a space of 2 to 5 years, where there was desert before, we can actually have gardening coming back.
Fascinating. Martin Frick with the World Food Program. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Families at a middle school in Massachusetts were seeing double last week when a whopping 23 sets of twins graduated. The principal of Pollard Middle School in Needham says twins made up 10% of the 8th grade class this year. She says class sizes are typically 450 to 500 students with 5 to 10 sets of twins normally. So how common are twins? According to the National Center for Health Statistics, twins represent roughly 3% of all live births in the U.S. Roughly 1/3 of twins are identical. Since this story put us on the hunt for more interesting facts about twins, they cannot use each other to get away with crimes, as even identical twins have different fingerprints. It is also possible for twins to have different biological fathers in a rare phenomenon known as heteropaternal superfecundation. Look it up. Many Americans say social media has had a negative effect on their mental health. Now the U.S. Surgeon General is calling for platforms to come with new warnings. You're streaming The Daily Report.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
Nate has one of the quickest minds I've ever seen.
Tony has a way of making people feel comfortable.
Gail has this unbelievable knack to ask the question that you're asking at home.
I've been told I could talk to a tree, and that's pretty much true.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings, weekdays at 7.
It didn't seem like anything could happen, because nothing ever happens in East Palestine, but it did.
Authorities released toxic fumes from 5 derailed train cars.
Resident, please evacuate.
Acute bronchitis due to chemical fumes.
Did you ever have these problems before the derailment?
No, ma'am.
This neighborhood's not safe no more.
We can assure the community that there's not vinyl chloride entering their communities.
Then why are there so many people feeling these various symptoms of bloody noses or difficulty breathing, bronchitis?
That's a hard question to answer.
We're talking about one of the most blatant releases of a mixture of some of the most toxic chemicals that we've seen in America.
I feel like now I have a duty to warn other communities. If my daughter has to watch me die of cancer, at least it saves someone else. This case.
It's like a screenplay, something straight out of Hollywood.
But it's not fiction. It's 48 hours.
Human remains found this week.
4 families shattered.
There's no physical evidence.
The mystery would haunt investigators for years.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Like a John Grisham novel.
A gripping true crime original, 48 Hours, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Stories that inform.
You can be really old at 60, and you can be really young at 85.
Inspire.
How do we unlock the power within ourselves to be who we want to be?
And brighten your day.
The best part of fame is making people feel good. Always send the people home happy.
Make every day a little more like Sunday morning.
Here comes the sun.
Stream now on the free CBS News app.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to our Dragon capsule here in space.
Sightseers in space, the thrill of a lifetime.
Seeing the Earth from space, it was so exhilarating.
But the risks that come with the territory.
There have been 4 fatal accidents. That's a 1% fatal accident rate.
Might make you look before you launch.
If you had 1 out of 100 airplanes falling out of the sky, we'd have a public crisis.
Space tourism, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Welcome back to the Daily Report. I'm John Dickerson. Here's some additions to our top stories. Weather forecasters say dangerously hot temperatures moving towards the northeast could put millions at risk and break dozens of records. About 22 million people are set to face temperatures above 100 degrees this week on the heels of what was Earth's hottest May ever recorded. Russian Navy ships and nuclear-powered submarine left Havana Monday after several days of military exercises in the Caribbean. While the U.S. said the ships never posed a threat to Americans, the move was still seen as a Russian show of force amid ongoing international tensions. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dissolved his country's war cabinet, which helped set Israel's war policy against Hamas. The move comes after one of Netanyahu's main rivals, former General Benny Gantz, resigned over the lack of a plan to govern Gaza after the war. For more on this, let's bring in John Alterman. He's the Senior Vice President and Director of the Middle East Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. John, it's good to be with you again. Let's start with the dissolution of the War Cabinet. What was the purpose of the War Cabinet, and how much is the fact that it no longer exists? How much of a blow is that to Netanyahu and to the current state of things?
It's not a blow to Netanyahu. It gives Netanyahu control. But in some ways, it also opens Netanyahu up to pleading from people he doesn't really want to listen to on the right of Israeli politics, that he has to listen to them more. He could say, look, I have a war cabinet. It's full of former war heroes. I have to get their military advice. So the security cabinet, which, believe it or not, has more than 20 members in it, was sidelined, and he worked with somewhat more like-minded, more centrist people to determine where the war was going. That was one of the things Benny Gantz said: if I'm going to join your government, I want a voice. I want the military people and not the political hangers-on to be making decisions. With him out, Netanyahu, in many ways, has control himself over what the cabinet does, but it also means that these right-wingers who he'd like to keep in the government but marginalize will be making more claims that they say we have to be in on the decisions that affect Israeli security.
Does that then, John, change the way the United States would look at Netanyahu's decisions, the way globally Netanyahu would be framed as he continues to have to make decisions here at this stage in the conflict? And will that potentially hurt his international posture if he's seen as just basically answering to his most extreme right wing?
The reality is that the people who left the cabinet and his defense minister have better ties with the international community, better ties with international military folks, better ties with the U.S. military than Netanyahu himself does. And I think keeping the people who say we have to think about how this war ends, we have to think ahead, those people get more and more marginalized, and voices like Minister Smotrich, the finance minister, who talks about resettling Gaza with Jews, are going to be more central to the Israeli government conversation. And to me, that's going to create a problem for Netanyahu, because you can't talk about this form of people that people say, well, I don't totally agree with Netanyahu, but at least we're talking to people in the war cabinet. Now they'll be talking to Netanyahu, and they'll say, but Netanyahu is talking to these guys, and what they want to do is madness.
So in that context, as the last question, Amos Hochstein is in the region trying to work on this work on this ceasefire deal. It's been 3 weeks since President Biden put it forward. How do you assess the state of things with that grinding negotiation over whether there's going to be any kind of an agreement to cease hostilities?
Frankly, it feels to me like both on the Israeli side and on the Hamas side, leaders say, the killing is hard, but the killing is a necessary sacrifice. There hasn't been enough of it because the other side has to move more than it's moved so far. I'm afraid that I look at this and I see the world saying this has to stop and the combatants saying this has to go on longer because we haven't won yet. We're going to win. We haven't won yet. We just have to keep at this.
A bracing assessment. John Alterman with the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Thank you so much, as always, John.
Good to see you again, John. Thank you.
After months of speculation about their partnership, Russian President Vladimir Putin will visit North Korean leader Kim Jong-un this week. Putin will travel to North Korea Tuesday in his first trip there in 24 years. Cooperation between the two nations has increased sharply since their last meeting in September. It's fanning Western fears that North Korea will provide Moscow with weapons to use against Ukraine. Any weapons deal between Russia and North Korea would violate multiple UN Security Council resolutions that Russia previously endorsed. Leaders of the G7 nations ended their yearly summit with a final statement declaring, quote, unwavering support for Ukraine as long as it takes. The communique, as the statement is traditionally called, promises financial, military, and humanitarian aid to Ukraine while condemning Russia for its, quote, illegal war of aggression. Leaders of 7 of the world's largest industrialized democracies and advanced economies also called out China, mentioning the country nearly 30 times in the communique, saying they will continue to take action against anyone in China that helps materially support Russia's war. France is facing a political reckoning after far-right parties emerged from the European Parliament election earlier this month with more power than before. In response, President Emmanuel Macron called snap elections in France a risky move to test whether the same voters were really committed to right-wing representation at home as they are in the European Parliament. The country is holding its own parliamentary elections on June 30th and July 7th. Hundreds of thousands of people took to the streets across France over the weekend to protest the apparent growing strength of the far right, but the polls show Macron's party is not popular. If these national races follow the same pattern from the EU election, France's centrist President Emmanuel Macron faces the possibility of a right-wing controlled parliament guiding the last 3 years of his term. Angela Charlton joins me now. She's the AP's Western Europe news director. Thank you so much for being with us. Catch us up on...
Hi, thank you for having me.
Catch us up on or tell us the story of Emmanuel Macron. I mean, where he came from, what his ambitions were to be kind of the leader of Europe, and now what he's facing in this moment of challenge.
So Emmanuel Macron rose up to power in 2017 by really coming in as a totally new party in the center. So you had, he pretty much crushed the traditional left and the traditional right, came in and was really popular in 2017. But in recent years, because of a lot of factors, he seems to have lost touch with the ground, kind of on the ground worries of the French voters, notably about inflation, cost of living. At the same time, he's been trying to solve broader global problems, climate change, the war in Ukraine. And while he's been so concentrated elsewhere, Marine Le Pen's party, which is really more far right than just right wing, they really took advantage of this, and she has spent the past decade building up a grassroots movement and following, particularly among rural voters or smaller town voters who no longer feel represented by the Parisian elite that they see Macron as a symbol of.
Angela, help us understand right wing in this French context. Because, of course, we've got our politics in the United States. Right wing doesn't mean the same thing across Germany, Italy, France. Help us land on what that definition means within France and how it might differ from other areas.
So France, some see Macron still as a centrist. Some see him as actually more center-right in the French spectrum. The traditional right wing here is relatively pro-business, conservative values, but also still overall supports the French welfare state. That's something that's really across the spectrum here. It has been pushing for tougher migration policies, but supports the EU in general and has been defending Ukraine. What we're really seeing is a rise of a farther right force here, which even so in France, really their focus is migration. And again, this is Marine Le Pen's National Rally Party that has really been the driving force here. And this is, their real focus is migration. They're also really playing up sort of past French glory and very skeptical of groups like the EU and NATO. It's worth noting that both the EU and NATO have been central to Europe's economic prosperity and security for the past half a century and more. And so this far right kind of piece of the French and European electorate has really been rising, and they're pushing for less of that European unity that we've seen over the past decades.
And so finally, quickly, Angela, on Ukraine and NATO, does that mean there's a real threat of a seriously weakened French position towards those two projects?
I'll start out by saying it's too early yet to know exactly what's going to happen in these elections. There is a possibility that we could end up with a government led by this far-right national rally. If that's the case, again, this is a party that's been traditionally very skeptical of NATO. They no longer advocate for pulling out of NATO altogether, but they do advocate for pulling France out of its strategic command, which would weaken the alliance. They have also advocated for less attention to Ukraine. This is a party that has been financed by a Russian bank in the past that traditionally for decades has had deep ties to Russia. And they would most likely push for less support for Ukraine within the EU. And France is really the second biggest power in the EU and the only nuclear armed power in the EU.
Angela Charlton, the Associated Press Western Europe News Director. Thank you so much, Angela.
Thank you.
On the side of every cigarette box, a label from the Surgeon General warns you how dangerous the product inside is. Now, Dr. Vivek Murthy wants the same label for social media platforms. In an op-ed in the New York Times Monday, Murthy said social media is associated with significant mental health harms for adolescents. But adding a simple label is not a simple task. Murthy notes that adding labels on platforms would require action from Congress. But some Republican states, like Florida and Utah, are already taking steps to address the issue by passing legislation limiting social media usage among minors. Coming up, millions of Americans are taking to the skies this summer. It's led to a surge in travelers at airports, and not just around holidays. Can the TSA keep up? We will explore this question here streaming The Daily Report.
Washington is the seat of power. National security, foreign policy, global economics, every story comes through Washington in some way. We bring some of the most powerful voices in America to the table. We don't just ask the questions, you have to go deeper. We try to understand what's at the heart of the issue we're talking about, to then come forward with solutions.
Face the Nation on CBS.
The justices ruled that Harvard and the University of North Carolina violated the Constitution.
In the aftermath of the Supreme Court decision to end affirmative action in college admissions, uncertainty sets in for some students of color.
Affirmative action really gave us an equal opportunity.
CBS Reports explores the historic decision and what it means for those chasing an opportunity to change their lives.
I knew that college was the ticket to break this cycle.
The end of affirmative action, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Okay, let's go. You guys good?
Hey.
All right, we good?
Keep going. The clock, it's ticking.
Off we go.
60 minutes. 60 minutes.
60 minutes.
It's time for 60 Minutes, Sundays on CBS.
An original documentary from CBS reports.
AI is among the most world-changing technologies ever.
Curing diseases, scientific breakthroughs, making lives better.
They can help us with medical discovery, scientific discoveries, doing better agriculture, having cures for things like Alzheimer's.
It's also going to really transform the way we work.
The uplifting potential of artificial intelligence is limitless.
It gives you a friend, somebody to chat with 24/7 that is non-judgmental. He makes me feel loved and desired.
And so are its downfalls.
The problem with all this AI is that it's unpredictable and uncontrollable. The choices we make now will have lasting effects for decades, maybe even centuries.
The ChatGPT revolution, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
We are about to see American weapons in the hands of Mexican cartels.
A gun pipeline to Mexico.
We are arming the cartels.
100%, no doubt about it.
Happening right under our noses.
Who's doing something about this? Nobody.
A CBS Reports exclusive.
Most Americans have no idea that we are effectively arming the enemy next door.
This is the story the American people need to know.
Arming cartels, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
America Decides, taking you inside American democracy.
The most important stories on a day-to-day, hour-to-hour basis.
You're going to hear a lot of reporting.
It is clearly a pivotal moment.
Gun control, the economy, education.
Both sides of the political aisle fight it out for power.
Bringing you the analysis that you need.
Thoughtfully, with context.
Be part of the conversation.
On CBS News Streaming.
Welcome to America Decides, Monday through Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern.
Time is ticking to book your summer travel with just days until the official start of the summer travel season. Friday, June 14th, marked the TSA's second busiest travel day of the year so far, with more than 2.9 million people passing through its checkpoints. The busiest day so far this year was May 24th, the start of Memorial Day weekend. 7 of the year's 10 busiest travel days have been recorded in the past month. For more, let's bring in Clint Henderson. He's the managing editor at The Points Guide. Thanks so much for being with us. So here's what struck me. This massive travel is taking place not on a holiday. We're all used to the travel that takes place on a holiday, but there seems to be a lot of activity here when we're not in a specific holiday. Why do you think that is?
So it's pretty incredible. We've been telling people for years that you should travel in shoulder season, in the late spring and late summer, early fall to get the best deals. But the word is really out. People are traveling all summer long, including into the fall now. So the peak travel season has really been extended, and you've just seen the relentless demand in travel. I attribute it, I think, to what happened during the pandemic. People couldn't travel. A lot of folks decided what they wanted to do when the pandemic was over was travel, and people are doing so.
So it feels like it's just still that pent-up demand from when you were stuck inside, either physically or psychologically. So what makes it different from previous years? Is it just that people are traveling when they didn't used to? Is it that they're traveling over this longer period?
So we've seen this sort of mixture of business and leisure. So more people are traveling for longer periods of time. The amount of travel MasterCard found was actually a day longer than it was pre-pandemic. So people are going away for longer periods of time. And I think you've also seen the recovery of business travel. So we had tons of leisure travelers, but now we're getting the business traveler back too. So combine all that, and it just is a recipe for long trips and a lot of people traveling.
Turns out you can't do everything over a Zoom meeting. Let me ask you about the inflation picture. One of the things that we hear so much about people's concerns about inflation, how much they don't like it, but all of this spending on travel would seem to be potentially inconsistent with that. In other words, if you were suffering from higher prices, you might save, stay home. Do you see any relationship between those two?
Yeah, so it's really interesting. People are willing to splurge on travel. And one area that we have seen come down a little bit is airfare. So we're seeing more deals for airfare. But what we have not seen yet is deals on hotels. So hotels are as expensive as they were coming out of the pandemic. There's less rooms available, and the hotel keepers are more willing to keep rooms open that they might have wanted to fill before at higher rates. So we've really seen prices stay high, especially for destinations and that demand really has not let up despite those high prices. So people are willing to pay for it, come heck or high water.
Final question I have to ask you about fear of missing out. Should people, is it too late for them to book their travel now? What's your guidance on that?
No, in fact, this is really surprising thing. So in the past 2 years, it's been so expensive to go to places like Europe last minute. But now we're finding deals, even last minute, every single day at the Point Sky, we're writing deals about flights so you can get really cheap still. So there are still deals to be had out there. Just jump on them when you see them, but it is not too late. And remember, you can go to like Google Explore and just put in your home airport. It'll find you the cheapest areas around you, even last minute. So there's lots of tools out there.
Excellent. Clint Henderson, thank you so much for being with us.
Anytime.
Still to come, this centenarian finally has her college degree in hand after completing her classes decades ago. We'll explain why it took so long. You're streaming The Daily Report.
Go to the ends of the earth.
Right now.
We got something crazy. And reach for the stars.
Here we are.
Time.
Yes, it's my comeback.
Hey, this is pretty fun.
But wait, there's more.
Experience thought-provoking,
I'm open to the idea of being a human being.
innovative, and truly original reporting.
Look through a telescope and go, wow.
Because there's always something new under the sun on CBS Sunday morning.
At this moment, terrorists could be plotting another attack.
9/11 triggered a counter-terrorist system that included a secret database.
This person needs a closer look.
A growing list of nearly 2 million people, including some Americans who say they're innocent.
On 1 hour flight, I have to spend 6 hours to go and come back.
CBS Reports explores the system, the people responsible for it, and those pushing for change.
I'm not fighting against them. I'm fighting for them to do the right thing.
The Watch List, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Don't miss true crime anytime you want, anywhere you go. With the 48 Hours podcast. Real crimes, real lives, real justice.
There's some questions that have to be asked and need to be answered.
Listen to 48 Hours on Apple Podcasts.
An original documentary from CBS Reports.
Imagine yourself in Manhattan with no police, no army, no mayor.
The people of Haiti stare down poverty, corruption, natural disasters, and violence.
90% of the guns that are used by gangs in Haiti are American guns.
But with an unbreakable spirit and eternal optimism.
There are days where I cry, but we can't be discouraged. We still believe in Haiti.
They're still able to look ahead with hope.
Haiti is on the brink of transformation, a radical shift. Haitians are coming together and saying things must change.
Fighting for Haiti, now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Hey there, welcome to The Uplift.
I thought she was a groom, and I stepped back and I went, oh, you're the queen. She's going to be with me every instant that I'm alive.
I just wanted to see if you'd go to Disneyland with me today.
I look over at him and he's smiling.
I'm going to remember that the rest of my life.
They told us when he was going to be born, he was only going to live for 30 minutes. It's really a miracle that he's with us today.
The Uplift. Stream now on the free CBS News app.
When you wake up in the morning, we want to be your go-to team.
On our places, bright, shiny faces.
I don't go to work in the morning. I go for coffee with my 2 good friends, and we talk about the world.
Your morning routine just got better. CBS Mornings.
A CBS News investigation. People looking for love, finding their life savings gone.
This could happen to anybody.
And sometimes losing their lives. Anything for love. Now streaming on the free CBS News app.
Best Musical. The Tony Award goes to The Outsiders.
Well, there you go. That's the moment. The Outsiders won the highly coveted Tony Award for Best Musical. That was on Sunday night. Other big winners include Suff's writer and star Shayna Taub for Best Book and Original Score. Broadway regular Jonathan Groff also snagged his first ever Tony. He and Daniel Radcliffe both took home awards for their performances in Merrily We Roll Along. The most nominated shows, Stereophonic and Hell's Kitchen, won 5 and 2 awards, respectively. Celebrity chef Gordon Ramsay has told fans on social media he was lucky to be alive after crashing his bicycle earlier this week. On Saturday, Ramsay posted a video urging his followers to wear helmets before revealing a huge bruise on his torso. He also showed before and after pictures from his accident, including his heavily damaged helmet. It serves as a reminder to make sure you have the right life-saving gear. Consumer Reports recommends the Trek Starvos Wave Cell, which sells for $104.99. For most of us, it takes about 4 years to earn a cap and gown, but for one Washington great-grandmother, it's an achievement that took decades. Virginia Hislop was studying for her master's in art at Stanford University in 1941 when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, plunging the United States into World War II. She quickly married her college sweetheart before he was deployed, then shifted focus to her family, never finishing her thesis. Now, 83 years later, she has her diploma, all because Stanford no longer requires a thesis for this degree. Here's a look at some of the stories we're covering in our next hour. Scorching weather targets the Northeast. More on the looming heat dome threatening millions of Americans with triple-digit temperatures. Plus, Israel's war cabinet is dissolved, but the fighting in Gaza is far from over. A look at what the political move means amid the ongoing humanitarian crisis. And Monday is the World Day to combat desertification and drought, how vital agricultural land is increasingly at risk. You're streaming CBS News.
Okay, so let's just start at the beginning.
Well, let me start with this. What is at stake here?